This has not been a great time for genius. The people who claim to have it do not seem to qualify for it. The people who diagnose it in others seem to have a very, very narrow definition in mind. And the people we can all agree are stone-cold geniuses always seem to have a dark side. I read in Bloomberg Businessweek about the biggest crypto genius of them all, Sam Bankman-Fried. At his peak, he was worth like $26 billion. And that was before he was accused of running one of the biggest frauds in American history. His defense is that he is not a criminal, essentially, just inept. What does it mean to have genius in work, in the marketplace, in life? And who is even to say? To make anything simple takes actual genius, and we're going to try to live up to that name together tonight. It's the Businessweek Show. Hello, I am Max Abelson, and I'm not a genius, just a regular, slightly above average journalist who has spent about the last decade and a half here at Bloomberg News, and sometimes our magazine, Bloomberg Businessweek, writing about Wall Street's money and power. And what that means is I write about ambition and ownership and imagination and survival and risk and second acts and, of course, genius. Tonight, and in the weeks to come, we are going to be talking about those things at this table with people whose lives and careers and ideas are big or interesting or just really fun. So, welcome. This is the Businessweek Show, and it's starting right now. If you consider yourself a master of Wall Street, a connoisseur of investing, a soothsaying financial genius, a brilliant portfolio manager, our guest has very bad news for you. Burt Malkiel's book, A Random Walk Down Wall Street, 50 years ago, had a clear and vivid message, which was that Wall Street genius is really just an illusion, and that professionals in pinstripe suits at the end of the day are no better than naked animals. It was a genius and radical idea, because what he had to say is that you should forget them and just buy and hold clear, boring, basic, low-cost index funds. He is here to tell us about it. Burt Malkiel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Your book is actually, it's pretty funny. It's a little saucy sometimes, your book. I mean, you say no one in finance can really forecast the future, or at least they can't do it successfully, consistently. You know, I think you use the word genius in quotation marks, and you give it to Ponzi schemers and whatnot. Right now, are there any actual individual geniuses on Wall Street? You know, real human geniuses, maybe AI is the genius we've been all waiting for. Can you identify any current geniuses on Wall Street right now?
Well, as you know, I put genius in quotes because I'm not sure there are geniuses in the market. And I've always said I would much rather be lucky than smart. Are there some hedge fund people who have, in fact, made a lot of money? George Soros bet against the British pound and made a lot of money. There were people who sold short in 2000 and made a lot of money. But I am not willing to say that they were geniuses. I want to say that they were lucky, because for every one of them, there was a hedge fund that in fact lost money. No, I don't think there are geniuses. I think there are a lot of very smart people on Wall Street, but it is not possible to predict the future. And, you know, it's kind of very interesting how you talk about AI. I recently had to give a presentation on the economic outlook. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know, just for kicks, I will go to ChatGPT and I will ask, can you give me an outline of what I should say? And actually, ChatGPT gave me a wonderful answer. It was a one-sentence answer. I cannot predict the future.
It might not necessarily qualify as genius, but you're able to write about Wall Street with clarity, which is really unusual because Wall Street, and I suffer from this myself, you speak to Wall Street executives and they absolutely fetishize complexity. Why does Wall Street like to make things sound so complicated? Is there something sinister or something that has to do with the ego?
I don't know whether it's sinister, but this is a very highly paid profession. And someone like me who says, listen, don't listen to anybody. Just buy a simple index fund and keep on investing period after period. If I'm charging you 2% a year to manage your money, I want you to think you can't do it yourself. So sure, you've got a vested interest. This is a very highly paid profession. And these guys do very, very well. Is that sinister? I don't know. You call it sinister, anything you want, but is there an incentive to make it seem like it's very complicated, that ordinary people can't do it themselves? I think that's absolutely right.
The honest truth is, it's not necessarily that I think that the aura of complexity on Wall Street is coming from a sinister place. More like it makes me feel bad or makes me feel dumb. And that I appreciate that your book is sort of written so that I can understand it. But it does make me think about exclusion in a small way, because so many stocks are owned by so few people in this country, because the very wealthiest people in America have such giant portfolios, that when the stock market goes up, inequality goes up too. Is there anything that can be done to change that in the future?
One of the things that's impressed me throughout my life is really how capable so many people are. And I think to the extent that we can eliminate discrimination, I mean, for example, opening up our jobs, our economic opportunities to women has been a very good thing, and I think has been generally helpful for women. I think it's the same sort of thing in terms of racial discrimination. I am absolutely convinced that rather than there being just a small coterie of geniuses, that intelligence is very widely distributed in our population. And so my own sense would be the more we can do with education, the better.
Why is it that we need geniuses, or really just the concept of genius? Is it like the way we need heroes and heroism, to help just explain the world and justify?
I think we need innovators, and I'm not saying that innovation isn't good. We absolutely do, but I'm not going to call them geniuses. And Jack Bogle would certainly never have called himself a genius. But I think we do need innovators. There will undoubtedly be financial products that are actually good for one. I'm not a fan of Bitcoin. I don't think, I don't recommend that any investor buy it. But will there be improvements in the payment system in the future? And will there be digital currencies in the future that are stable and that are useful, as opposed to something that goes up $1,000 or down $1,000 in a day? Absolutely. And there's room for much more innovation in finance. So I think there will be innovation. There should be innovation. I just wouldn't call it genius.
That was great. Burt Malkiel, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Stay tuned, because next we have a very far out genius. There is no one way to be a genius. You could be dreamy and far out. You could be scrupulous and scientific. You could work within the institutional establishment, or you could honor indigenous wisdom. All of those descriptions apply to this guest. Moriba K is a space environmentalist, an astrodynamicist, a spacecraft navigator, and the first African-American professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Texas. Last year, the MacArthur Foundation gave him a fellowship that is informally known as a Genius Grant. So, if you want, you could call him a genius, you could call him Professor K, but you'd rather you call him Moriba. So, Moriba, welcome.
Great to be here, my brother. Thank you so much.
Really glad to have you. I really love the phrase, a stroke of genius. You were in Alaska with your family in a hotel one morning. I think you were taking a shower.
Yeah.
And you had this feeling and this vision that kind of struck you. And you know, whether or not it has anything at all to do with genius, tell us about that moment.
You know, I'm in the shower, and I felt a presence. And in my mind's eye, I saw flashes of scenes from like history and how in the beginning, whatever that means, it seems like there was this intergenerational contract of stewardship with the planet, but that humanity over time has mostly abandoned that intergenerational contract of stewardship and has forgotten about how interconnected things are.
Did that moment change the life you led and the work that you do?
Absolutely. So one of the people that I really look up to is Jane Goodall. I watched something about Jane where she said that she went to a meeting as a scientist and she left that meeting an activist. In very similar ways, I went to Anchorage kind of just this scientist, and I came back both a scientist and now this space environmentalist activist to really try to, I guess, really showcase how we need to protect orbital space.
If there's a kind of genius that means something to you, something that you would want to live up to, or something you'd want to recognize in yourself, what would that kind of genius like actually look like?
To me, the best kind of genius is simply allowing myself to let the universe go through me and, I guess, use me as some sort of vehicle for the work that I'm trying to do. And if I can keep myself kind of in the moment and in a place of compassion and empathy, then I think genius is just what comes through when you allow that to happen.
There's more garbage orbiting the Earth than there are working satellites. You now work not just to make sure that all that stuff is properly tracked, but to be an evangelist for expanding the way we think about environmental protection so that it includes all that stuff. What can those of us who are not scientists, what can we do to help you?
Every day, the technologies that we have are more and more reliant on these robots in the space that we call satellites. And we're tracking about 50,000 things ranging in size from a cell phone to the space station. 5,000 are working and everything else is garbage. So that's like 90% of the stuff is trash. The thing that most people just don't realize is that these satellites that are providing these critical services and capabilities, position, navigation, timing, communications, internet with the Starlink satellites, right? Any of these things can get schwacked, that's the technical term, get schwacked by a piece of junk, and that's game over, and then you lose that capability. So I think more and more people just need to be aware that, oh, well, that space, that's somebody else's problem. No, it's our problem because our way of life, our technology is now going through this infrastructure.
There's a real stereotypical idea of genius that I'm thinking of a kind of solitary genius working by herself or himself off in a fun cabin, you know? What does it mean? What would it mean to be a genius collaborator?
Back in the times of like the Renaissance, people looked at folks like, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and they said, okay, these are geniuses in their own right, right? And people say, well, how can anybody be like another one of those? Science has developed so much beyond those days that there's no way for somebody to be able to be, quote unquote, this Renaissance person that knows very deeply things in all these different fields. Like, those days are gone, okay? But to me, the real genius is recognizing where you bring in smart people from other fields that complement and augment your own to solve wicked problems.
Yeah, connectedness, connections with one another.
Yeah.
But my understanding, though, from reading a little bit of your writing, is that you were, I think in your childhood, you felt really isolated.
I did, yeah. My mom was born in Haiti, and she was naturalized citizen. My father, Sierra Leone, naturalized citizen. They got divorced when I was very young, and yeah, my father was just very abusive. So at the age of 7, he kidnapped me, and 9 days later, they found me in some apartment in the Bay Area, put me back on a plane to my mom. And my mom had, we had a cousin that lived in Caracas, and so we fled the country because my mom's like, I don't want your father to ever find you again. He never did physically again. But growing up in Venezuela, I felt very isolated. I felt very alone. I came into contact in this void with what seemed to feel like an ocean of infinite love and compassion. And then I realized, oh, I have a choice here. I can choose to meet my experiences with equal anger, or I can choose to act from a place of love and compassion and heal from my pain and make my healing be of service to others. And that's what I've chosen to do.
When the MacArthur Foundation, when they named you a fellow, they said it was because, they used a beautiful phrase, it's because you envision transparent and collaborative solutions for the Earth's orbital spheres. What are those solutions? And maybe when are they coming?
My inspiration for this comes from indigenous people, from traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, I call it ancient tech. And so for me, the vision of my future is seeing Western science and traditional ecological knowledge come together, not annihilate each other, but actually harmonize with each other, so that then that could be the way of the future, so that humanity does recognize interconnectedness, empathy, and stewardship.
Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story, sharing yourself.
Thank you, brother.
Truly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Coming up next, a genius I would like to be when I grow up. Getting older is not easy, but the good news is time brings opportunities to become a more practiced, a more seasoned, a more you version of you. The guest who's sitting with me at this table is one of the most accomplished people I've ever met, and she is 17 years old. In 2021, Zaila Avant-garde won the Scripps National Spelling Bee, but she considers herself not so much a speller as a basketball player, and she has multiple Guinness World Records in juggling. A few weeks ago, this young genius started the 11th grade. Zaila, so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Truth is, we're all super different. We all have our own gifts. We all have our own limitations. When and how did you come to realize how special you are?
So that's a complicated question, I would say, because I didn't so much realize, I realized I was special, but I became special through a process of training and stuff. If you look back on it, I wouldn't say I popped out the womb like a genius or something like that. It's like when people would start to stop and look at me while I was dribbling or practicing at a court, people stop and look because, hey, look at this cute little girl. I was very small when I was that age. So this cute little girl dribbling 2 balls and doing all this between the legs, step backs into shots and stuff. So pretty early on, I realized that, yeah, I might be a little bit different than the average kid.
You won this completely beloved national competition, but it's something that I think you no longer consider your main passion, or maybe you didn't even consider it your main passion then. What does basketball make you feel that spelling doesn't?
I would say basketball gives me even more of the competitive rush. I just really love to compete and stuff. So and spelling is more yes, it's not really person-to-person competition. It's more person versus dictionary, which is something you hear a lot from spelling bee people. It's it's me versus the dictionary, because that's where the words are coming from. Whereas with basketball, it's more physical competition. Oh, I made it between the legs, and there's this girl on me, and I have to shield her off. And it's more tangible competition, as opposed to the more philosophical competition of spelling.
I want to ask you about a very different kind of genius. There's this billionaire named Sam Bankman-Fried. Think you've heard of him?
Of course.
Widely considered to be the world's, great crypto genius before he was then charged with fraud, which he has denied. How should the rest of us look at people who get called geniuses, but maybe they still have shortcomings, just like everybody else?
Sometimes I feel like the term genius is like nowadays it's so loaded. Like it's not, maybe it's like, oh, it doesn't just mean, oh, look at her, she's a genius, like she's so smart or whatever. But like then like if you're labeled with that like your whole life, that kind of like puts a pressure on you. Like maybe once upon a time, like I listened to a podcast about Sam Bankman-Fried, but I don't know him personally, so I can't speak for him. But hypothetically, like he's like his parents are like, oh my God, you're so smart. He goes to accelerated programs in school, and that's just putting pressure from a very early age. Like, I'm a genius, I have to be a genius, I have to always be a genius. So I always feel like people, like some of the scammers and stuff, should get maybe just a little bit of sympathy, just a little bit, because they are like causing all sorts of trouble, because like they've been considered geniuses their whole life and they had a nice business plan or something, but then it didn't work out. And so what are they supposed to do? Go to all these people who say, oh, you're a genius. That just puts a little pressure on you to like give you that extra push you needed to try to maybe go into the murky waters of life.
The murky waters of life. I want to ask you one final question about pressure. I think that there is sometimes pressure in the United States, maybe everywhere, pressure on really smart people, genius or otherwise, to use their intelligence to like make a lot of money, to be successful. And like, I guess I'm thinking specifically about the finance industry and mathematicians, but it's true of the business world. You're smart, you go make money in business. Do you have a favorite company or an industry or like a job that appeals to you?
I mean, I'm not like super like make millions of dollars. I mean, if anybody who's watching or listening wants to give me millions of dollars, please hit me up. However, like I'm interested in going to neuroscience or maybe working for NASA or maybe being an NBA head coach. But I just realized I've never thought, how much money would I get for this? Because that's not really something like I think of, because you can make a lot of money, not to sound trite, but you can also be really miserable making a lot of money. So that's not even something I actually consider, like how much money will I make? I'll cross that bridge when it comes.
Zaila, you're gonna cross the bridge, you're gonna have a great time. I have had a great time talking to you. I'm thrilled you were here.
Thanks for having me.
When you ask geniuses, as I just did, what a genius is, or if we need geniuses, or if they're a genius, the answer you'll get will be genius. It turns out that there is not one way to be a genius of finance, or of art, or of language, just as there is not one way to think about genius itself. What matters is not what you call unusually high levels of intelligence or talent. What matters is what you do with it. Thank you so much for watching the first episode of the Businessweek Show. We'll see you again for another one soon.
I am a completely virtuous person. I have no missing virtues. But I do wish I could sing.
People clearly tend to be impatient where they should be patient.
I waste the most money on champagne. I love champagne every day. Every day I have 2 glasses of champagne. That's my thing. 2 glasses of champagne every day.